From 1953 to 1973, the CIA secretly dosed unwitting American and Canadian citizens with LSD and conducted torture experiments to develop mind control, then destroyed nearly all the records. MKUltra was not a conspiracy theory. It was a real program that the CIA ran for 20 years across at least 149 individually numbered sub-projects, with real government funding, real academic scientists, and real victims. The victims were not told they were being experimented on. Some of them were institutionalized psychiatric patients. Some were federal prisoners. Some were sex workers lured into government-run safe houses. Some were ordinary civilians who were drugged without any knowledge of what was happening to them at all. The records were ordered destroyed in 1973. Almost everything we now know about the program comes from roughly 20,000 documents that a records clerk happened to misfile before the shredding order arrived. Congress held public hearings on it in 1977. A presidential commission investigated it. A man's family fought for 22 years just to learn how he actually died. And still, decades later, no one can say with certainty how many people the program actually harmed. In 1950, the CIA became seriously alarmed by reports of Soviet and Chinese techniques used to break prisoners and extract false confessions. American prisoners of war held in Korea were producing signed statements openly critical of the United States and even confessing to war crimes historians now believe never happened. The agency concluded on relatively thin evidence that communist interrogators had developed some genuine form of mind control, a reliable method for overriding a person's will and compelling them to say or believe things they otherwise never would. The CIA's response was to try to develop the same capability for itself, or at minimum to seriously investigate whether it was even scientifically possible. In April 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles formally authorized Project MKUltra. The program was placed under Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist with a doctorate from Caltech who had also personally overseen several CIA assassination plots involving poison, including efforts to develop a toxin for use against Cuban leader Fidel Castro. Gottlieb was given a substantial discretionary budget, a broad mandate, and almost no meaningful oversight from Congress or even most of the CIA's own leadership. The stated goal was to develop reliable techniques for interrogation, behavior modification, and outright mind control. The tools to be investigated included drugs, primarily LSD, mescaline, and various barbiturates, hypnosis, electroconvulsive therapy, sensory deprivation, psychological manipulation, and multiple forms of physical and psychological torture. The experiments, as one surviving internal document coldly phrased it, were to be conducted on people who could not fight back. The people who could not fight back included prisoners in federal penitentiaries, some of whom were given LSD repeatedly without being told what the drug even was. They included patients in psychiatric hospitals who were given powerful hallucinogens and subjected to extended sensory deprivation experiments they had never consented to. They included sex workers who were lured to CIA-run safe houses in New York and San Francisco, where agents dosed their drinks with LSD and then observed their behavior from behind one-way mirrors, in a specific sub-program the CIA code-named Operation Midnight Climax. MKUltra ultimately ran 149 distinct sub-projects across at least 80 institutions, major universities, hospitals, prisons, and CIA facilities scattered across the United States and Canada. Many of the individual researchers involved genuinely did not know they were working for the CIA at all. The funding was quietly channeled through a network of front organizations, private foundations, and grant programs designed specifically to obscure its origin. The experiments ranged from the merely absurd to the genuinely sadistic. Some subjects were given LSD continuously for 77 days without a break. Others were subjected to weeks of total sensory deprivation, confined alone in darkened, soundproofed rooms with no sense of time. Others were hypnotized and then subjected to looped recorded messages designed to reprogram their responses to specific triggers. In Canada, a psychiatrist named Dr. Ewan Cameron, working with direct CIA funding at Montreal's McGill University, conducted experiments he personally called psychic driving, forcing psychiatric patients to listen to looped recorded messages for 16 to 20 hours a day, while keeping them chemically sedated for weeks at a time, and periodically administering electroconvulsive therapy at doses multiple times above accepted clinical practice. In November 1953, a CIA biochemist and Army scientist named Frank Olson attended a work retreat at Deep Creek Lake in rural Maryland. At the retreat, without his knowledge or consent, colleagues from his own agency slipped LSD into his after-dinner drink as part of an internal test to observe reactions to unexpected dosing. Olson, who had no preparation for a hallucinogenic experience and no idea he had been drugged at all, had a severe and prolonged psychological reaction. He became acutely paranoid, withdrawn, and deeply disturbed. In the following days, he showed unmistakable signs of a serious mental health crisis, and colleagues arranged for him to see a New York psychiatrist under a false pretext. On the night of November 28, 1953, Frank Olson fell, or was thrown, from a 10th-floor window of the Hotel Statler in New York City and died on the pavement below. The CIA told his family that he had jumped, that he had been quietly struggling with mental health issues of his own. The specific circumstances that his own government had secretly dosed him with LSD days earlier were withheld entirely. They stayed withheld for 22 years. In 1975, when a Senate investigation into wider CIA abuses began exposing the existence of MKUltra, Olson's son Eric learned for the first time what had actually happened to his father. The family received a personal apology and a cash settlement from the Ford administration, but Eric kept pushing. The body was exhumed in 1994 for an independent forensic re-examination. The medical examiner who conducted it concluded the death was in fact a homicide, that Olson had most likely been thrown from the window rather than having jumped on his own. No one was ever charged. In 1973, as the Senate's investigations into intelligence agency abuses were beginning to gather momentum, CIA Director Richard Helms personally ordered the entire MKUltra file archive destroyed. The command was carried out swiftly. An estimated 95% of the program's documentation was shredded within weeks before any outside investigator could examine it. The roughly 20,000 documents that survived did so only because they had been accidentally misfiled in an unrelated financial record storage facility and were never located by the staff carrying out the destruction order in time. Their existence was discovered by chance in 1977. They formed the entire evidentiary basis of the Senate hearings held that same year, at which senior CIA officials, some of whom had personally been involved in running the program, were questioned under oath before television cameras. The testimony produced by those hearings was marked by a specific, recurring quality. Officials who claimed they simply couldn't remember key details, documents that supposedly no longer existed, and a consistent pattern of officials minimizing the program's scale, even as the surviving 20,000 pages suggested otherwise. The victims of MKUltra received no formal apology from the CIA itself. Some individual victims or their families later received limited legal settlements after filing lawsuits, a process that in several cases dragged on for over a decade. The Canadian government eventually paid roughly $100,000 in compensation, divided among a group of Ewan Cameron's surviving former patients at McGill decades after their treatment. The question of precisely how many people were experimented on without consent How many were secretly dosed, forcibly confined, psychologically manipulated, or otherwise harmed across 20 years of classified human experimentation simply cannot be answered today. The records that would answer it were deliberately destroyed. 20 years of experiments run on people who, by the CIA's own internal description, could not fight back. Documents shredded before investigators or historians could ever fully count the victims. The files that did survive only exist today because one clerk, decades ago, happened to file them in the wrong cabinet. The CIA program that secretly drugged its own citizens for 20 years. This is not a conspiracy theory that eventually turned out to be nothing. It was a real, funded, sustained program with real human victims whose full scope was deliberately and successfully destroyed before it could ever be properly documented. Frank Olson fell from a hotel window in New York in 1953. His family was told for 22 years that it was a simple suicide. They learned the truth in 1975. His body was exhumed for renewed examination in 1994. The medical examiner called it a homicide. No one was ever charged with his death. Some of the files that did survive the shredding are still partially redacted today, 70 years later. Subscribe if you want more. See you in the next one.